Phares. He is an author. He is a professor, former professor of Middle East Studies and Ethnic and Religious Conflict at Florida Atlantic University. He has testified in front of Congress, the European Union, the United Nations Security Council. And in the conversations that I've had with Dr. Phares over the years, his frank assessment and analysis of the global threats that we face from the jihadist movement, quite frankly, sometimes leave me somewhat dismayed at our nation's lack of understanding of who we're fighting, what we're fighting, why we're fighting, and what they're fighting for. Now, before Dr. Phares came on, I was telling you about the anger management program that they have in Saudi Arabia, where 11 of the 117 detainees were released to Saudi Arabia, only to be re-released out and put back on the most wanted terrorist list. We've got now the catch and release story about Taliban fighters in Afghanistan angering our troops, and well, it should. But I think it's most important to talk with the doctor about his new book, The Coming Revolution, Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East, whether or not we really have a true understanding of precisely who we're up against and opposes democracy, why, and is there anything that we can do to correct what I see as the wrong path that we seem to be heading down time and time again. Dr. Walid Phares, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be back with you.
When you look at these anger management programs, and I guess if you can try anything to maybe dissuade somebody from becoming a member of the jihadist movement, if you can use a catch and release program for some end game that I'm not sure of what it might be. When you take a look at the corruption of the Karzai government, when you take a look at the corruption in the Kabul bank, the drug-dealing brother of the president of Afghanistan, I mean, all of these things point to me, Doctor, as maybe we just don't know why we're there. And if we don't know why we're there, I would have to ask you the question, should we be there?
Well, the WikiLeaks, right? This is the era of WikiLeaks, told us that at least U.S. officials, including the higher-ranking officials, knows exactly where the problem is coming from in terms of radicalization, creating these extremists. Didn't we read a few days ago that U.S. officials knew that donors from Saudi Arabia, from the Gulf, the Arabian-Persian Gulf, have been funding for many, many years schools and madrasas and spread of extremism. So the problem is not that we do know or don't know, it's our policy that doesn't want to admit that. So that's one of the most important points. The point number two, not only we haven't educated our public, the American public and the Western public, with regard the real map of the jihadists, how large it is, how insignificant have been our inroads to stop it, but there is another map, which I am now showing in my new book, The Coming Revolution, of people who have been struggling against the jihadists in the region, and we have abandoned. It's like in World War II. We imagine in World War II we wouldn't be speaking to the French resistance, to the Danish resistance, to all the Polish resistance. That's the point I'm making. If you remember quickly, in 2005 when I published my first book, my first post-9/11 book, Future Jihad, I was trying to educate, my viewers and listeners and readers that there is a threat. And now in this book, I'm trying to inform that we have allies. We need to reach out to them to defeat the jihadists.
Let me ask you this, Doctor, and it's going to come across cynical, and it's intended that way, but if you cure a disease, there's no money in the medicine. If you win a war, there's no money in the operation. Have we gone from combat to commerce? Are we putting soldiers in harm's way so that we can continue to pay off corrupt Afghani officials and contractors can take skims and give it to corrupt government officials, and we can have contractors make money off the war?
That's a central question in the whole debate about the so-called war on terror, the confrontation with the jihadists. You and I have discussed it for many times. I've briefed Congress and the European Parliament many times about this huge difference between what we have been investing, and you just mentioned the blood price of our soldiers, men and women who have been killed or maimed in Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere, the billions of dollars we've been spending, and the hundreds of millions of dollars U.S. and other allies have been spending on the so-called strategic communications, what we call swaying hearts and minds of people, versus what? What hearts and minds have we been able to sway from the radicals? Nobody. But at the same time, those whom we have abandoned, like this 1.5 million people demonstration in Iran, remember? 2009, when they were going against the regime, What did the administration do? Oh, we have nothing to do with it. Imagine that under a Reagan era would have said, oh, Lech Walesa and the workers' union in Poland struggling against the Soviets, oh, we should not meddle between them and the Soviets. It's a question of policy. We are investing in hardware and fighting on the ground without really touching the ideology. And if we do not touch the ideology, then we're going to continue to do so. And eventually, at some point, our citizens are going to tell us, what are we doing in Middle Earth, in Afghanistan, and Iraq? Let's bring the boys and girls back home.
Would I be wrong, Doctor, in saying that the vast majority of people in this country think that we're going it alone in Afghanistan, that we don't have a coalition of partners that are willing to work with us to push back against the Islamist movement, the jihadi movement, and that if maybe they knew that there were elements in the Middle East that you talk about in the book, The Coming Revolution, that are working every day to try and stand up against this movement, that maybe if they had a better understanding, they might have more support for our efforts in Afghanistan, Iraq, and certainly what we have to be concerned with an unstable nuclear Pakistan?
Absolutely. I mean, look, it is a war, but it's also a war of ideas. The jihadi propaganda, should it be Salafi, Wahhabi-like, or should it be Iranian Khomeini-like? Of course, the first thing on their agenda is to make sure that the American public, because we are in a democracy, the American public would stop the support to these efforts by the United States to defeat the jihadists by projecting the idea that the entire Arab world, the Muslim world, the greater Middle East, they're all against America. America is isolated. That's what we hear every day on Al Jazeera, Al Manar. But that's normal. That's the jihadist propaganda machine waging war against us. What is abnormal, not normal, is that most of the academic elite in this country, most of the media, traditional media in this country, carries the same arguments. Who do you think is miseducating the American public? Not the jihadists. They're partners. They're indirect partners in this country. That's why shows like yours and bloggers are the ones who are unfortunately the only ones educating the American public that not only the jihadists are a threat, we need to connect with our allies, even if they are weak, but they are on the inside of these societies, and they will be the ones to basically fight alongside with us by different means, including by, non-violent means. Look what happened in Beirut. Who would think that after 20 years of Syrian occupation, you've got 1.5 million people demonstrating in the streets of Beirut in 2005. And now, unfortunately, because of our misguided policy in Lebanon and in the Middle East, now the Hezbollah has taken over Lebanon. And same goes for Iran, whereby the Iranian Pasdaran are crushing the Green Movement. And let me ask, the last question here. What happened to Darfur? There was a genocide in Darfur 5 years ago. Did it end, or did we end our policy of support to Darfur? These are the real strong questions that I try to answer in the book, The Coming Revolution.
You look at some of the, you bring up Darfur, you take a look at Rwanda, 800,000 Hutus and Tutsis whacking each other. And what do we do there? And supposedly we're about liberating people and we're about spreading democracy to the most jaded out there, Doctor. They say, well, we're just there because of oil and mineral rights. How would you respond to them?
Well, those regimes and those networks and the companies working with them and those who are funded by them, like the Salafi networks, are all putting an effort to make sure to influence our foreign policy. Why do you think that let's say the Wahhabis have been funding our Middle Eastern studies in this country from coast to coast? They have been funding with tens of millions of dollars for many, many years to influence our foreign policy. They don't want us to link up with civil societies because these civil societies in those countries can be the one to moderate these countries, can be the one to isolate the jihadists. You know what? The real power that would help us in the war on terror are the moms. Who is in touch with the kids between 0 and 6-year-old? The mom. Who's in touch with kids between 6 and 12? The teacher. So these civil society forces that we can connect with through our NGOs, our support, our dollars that are going nowhere at the end of the day, the enemy knows that, and that's why they are oppressive and suppressive of women, of minorities, of students, of cab drivers. So we need to explain to our public that we are there for the good. The people there want us, want our help, want our visibility. That's all what they need. When I speak with Iranian dissidents, with Lebanese, freedom workers, what they tell me, we need your president, we need your congressional leaders to give us the visibility they gave the Soviet dissidents, not more, not less.
Dr. Walid Phares is with us. His book out today, The Coming Revolution, Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East, Amazon.com. We link to it at jerrydoyle.com, and you can also get it at all major book outlets. When you hear the simplistic rationale that comes from some with regard to why we're in the Middle East, they say it's because they oppose our values or lack thereof. They oppose our morals or lack thereof. They oppose the imagery coming out of Hollywood. Overly simplistic, possibly somewhat true, but what is it that they most oppose that we're trying to impose, in some people's opinion, on them that they're rejecting?
No. That's the war of ideas. That's your enemy projecting onto our public that America would be in the Middle East in contradiction with values. That's not what it is. We were told for dozens of years that the peoples of Eastern and Central Europe and of the Soviet Union loved to be communist. Everybody was communist. Everybody hated the West, capitalism. And in a very short 6 months, what did we see? A complete collapse, domino collapse of the Communist Party. The Soviet Communist Party was 5 million. In 3 weeks, it became 50,000. And we see today where these European, Eastern and Central Europeans are going, the open market economy, and they are limping and mediocre, but they're moving forward. We have been told by the jihadi propaganda, including by their partners in the West, that the entire Middle East is opposing us. They want their women to be, in shadow. That is not true, because in one glimpse, we saw that inside the most fundamentalist country on the face of earth after the Taliban in Iran, 1.5 million people. Did we look at who was demonstrating? These are not the older people under the Shah. 60% were women. 70% of these women were under the age of 18. So that is the future of the Middle East. And they were writing in English and in other languages to tell us that we actually want freedom. The only difference that these guys have no freedom, have no access to the microphone. Who is giving us those ideas that we are the imperialists? The jihadi imperialists. They are afraid of democracy. They're afraid of their own people.
Absolutely. You mentioned when you first came on, Doctor, about WikiLeaks and what we learned. And you know, I've seen the argument about Julian Assange and WikiLeaks that some people are calling for his assassination. Some are writing that we should kill him. Others are saying that he's a freedom fighter by others' definition. I think there's some good, bad news in what we're learning. And in some of what we're learning that you point out, I think there's egg on the face of some people that might not like to see the information get out. And while there might be issues of national security that we have to address, and while there might be a case made that certain people's lives might be somewhat compromised because of the information that got out, is it not in a certain way helpful for us to know that maybe we're being lied to or manipulated for someone else's financial gain or political gain?
It's amazing how, by basic instincts, most of us in this field, including yourself and myself, are coming to the conclusion that, yes, of course, Assange is a criminal. Yes, of course, he should go, through the legal process. Of course, that goes without any questioning. But isn't it odd that the byproduct of apology in this country and in this, the West has produced this? He's the product of those who have been lying on the American and the Western public. He's the one who's saying, oh, we're going to expose everything in the same way. The entire system that he is now shaken off, he's like a monster, quote unquote, of course, created by the system. So be it. Yes, of course, WikiLeaks is showing us that a lot of these forces in the Middle East have been basically playing a double game. When, you have the regimes in the region who are telling us, oh, please attack Iran, right? That's what the Saudis, the Gulf, and many countries have been telling us for many, many years. At the same time, when they meet in the Arab League, when they meet in the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference, what is it that they say? Oh, had it been not the American intervention in the region, America's foreign policy should change. And they start to criticize us, while in the afternoon the diplomats are asking us to intervene. Good, be it. Now it is known. Let them handle it.
And I look at how quick many are to label Assange as a terrorist, but yet so many that we have in our government here won't designate the Taliban as a terrorist organization. Even our own State Department won't designate the Taliban as a terrorist organization, but yet immediately it was a collective. Julian Assange is a terrorist, and he should be assassinated. I was fascinated by that, Doctor. Because
one of them basically opened a breach in that wall, and they have to handle it. I mean, he's a terrorist because he broke, a piece of that wall, and now everybody can. Now, legally speaking, he's going to be handled in courts. But what he has done, or his organization have done, it's like when you have a outgrowth in your system which is basically negative, it's going to create the component of its own end. And that's the story of WikiLeaks. It's from the same system that has been blocking the truth to most Americans and most Europeans.
Absolutely. Always great stuff, Dr. Phares. The book is The Coming Revolution, Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East. It's out today. Get a copy. Dr. Phares is, if not the best, one of the best. One of, I would say, the top 3 go-to guys that really understands what we're up against, what needs to be done. And in his book, also critically, folks, he takes a look at critical steps that we can take so that we can push back against the rise of the Islamist movement and do what we need to do. Dr. Walid Phares, thanks again for your time on the program and continued success with your work.
Thank you so much.
The Jerry Doyle Show.